Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Chief Makemba's letter to Major von Wissman. This is one of the great anti-colonial documents of the late 19th century. Makemba was a ruler of a number of tribes in what's now Tanzania. At the time, it was called Tanganyika. And in the late 1880s into the 1890s, Germany was attempting to colonize the area. This was part of the scramble for Africa, the carving up of the African continent among the European powers at the Congress of Berlin in 1884 and 85, a Congress to which no Africans were invited to contribute, it is worth noting. And the Germans claimed what was, again, at the time called Tanganyika. In the early 1880s, they very successfully and brutally subdued the nations that lived in the coastal region. But Makemba's people, the Yao people, lived more inland. So they were a little bit harder for the Germans to get to. And the Germans made several attempts. Actually, after this letter, because von Wissman, who was a major in charge of the German expedition into Tanganyika, he had initially sent a letter to Makemba saying, come and basically submit to German rule. Makemba sends this letter back. But basically, Makemba says no, and we'll talk a little bit more about how exactly he approaches saying no. But after this exchange, the Germans made several attempts to invade Yao territory, and the first couple of times, Makemba was able to successfully drive them out using guerrilla tactics and just the dedication of his people to not being conquered. Eventually, the Germans did overrun the area. Makemba initially, when that happened, Makemba initially sort of agreed to be subject to German rule, but then he revolted and he fled to Mozambique, and he basically started fighting the Portuguese in Mozambique in the same way that he had fought the Germans in Tanganyika. So he was a badass dude. Makemba, really, really awesome. So basically what happens with von Wissman, he sends Makemba a letter and a verbal message saying, come to the station at Lindy, and submit, accept the Germans as your rulers. The short version of Makemba's response is, no thanks, come and have a go if you think you're hard enough. So I'm going to actually read you the whole letter because it's not super long, but it's really, really interesting. So it's undated, but it's from around the fall of 1890. Addressed to my friend and brother, the Commander-in-Chief. I am informing you that your letter has arrived and that I have read it and know everything it contains. Moreover, I have heard what you have to say, but I find no reason that I should obey you. I would rather die. I have no relationship to you, and I cannot recall that you ever gave me a piazza, or a quarter piazza, or a needle, or a thread. I look for a reason why I should obey you, and I find not the slightest. If it is only a matter of friendship, then I am not opposed, now or in the future, but to be your subject, that I cannot do. If it is only a matter of friendship, then we are agreed. So this is the first paragraph. Basically, Makemba says, got your letter. I have no reason whatsoever to agree to be your subject. The reference to a piazza or a half piazza or a needle or a thread, Makemba was a great trader. He had a commercial empire in his part of Africa. And so these were the kinds of things that European colonizers, particularly the Portuguese, tended to try and give African nations in exchange for sort of giving up their sovereignty. Basically, Makemba here is saying, you don't even have a trade relationship with me. We have no relationship whatsoever. There's no way I'm going to come in and submit to you. I would, if you want to be friends, if you want to have a trading relationship, something like that, perfectly fine. But we will be equal partners. The next bit he says here, if you want to fight, I am ready, but to be your subject, never. Pretty straightforward. And he says, what you are hearing here is said without ambush. I will not fall at your feet, for you are a creature of God, and I too am created. I am no God to be able to help you, and if you hear anything in my message, it is that we have no relationship. So this reference, for you are a creature of God, according to, so I'm reading this in the Norton Anthology of World Literature, according to the footnotes here, this is kind of a reference to phrasing from the Lutheran Bible. Von Wissman was a German. The dominant religion in Germany was Lutheranism, and so von Wissman would almost certainly have been familiar with that phrasing. And so Makemba is using religious rhetoric that von Wissman would deeply identify with in order to make the argument that his people and the Germans are equals. The Yao and the Germans are equals. There's no good basis for them to submit, for the Yao to submit. Then he says, I am sultan in my land. You are sultans in your land. Behold, I am by no means saying to you that you should obey me. Not at all. Indeed, I know that you are a free man. Not since I was born have I ever set foot on the coast. Should I set foot on it now because you summon me? I will not come, and if you are strong enough, then come get me. I would rather lose your respect by being captured than submit to you. So again, this idea that, like, you have no claim on me. There's no good reason why I would come and subjugate myself to you. We're not we have no relationship. I am an independent ruler. You are an independent ruler. I'm not demanding that you come and submit to me. There's no basis for you to make that demand of me. Then we get this interesting little bit. I'm going to talk about the language that this letter is written in just a second. He says, besides, my child is called weakling, and ever since he was born has not known what war is. God willing, if you want to get me, then come. I will not come in person. Greetings. And then I'll just stick the last little bit on here. This letter comes from your friend Makemba, son of Makama, of the family of Masaninga, written in his own hand. So the reference to my child is called weakling. That's an odd bit. The footnote here says, literal translation from German. The lost Swahili term may have had special cultural significance, such as describing a youth who has not yet seen combat. I think that's probably a reasonable read. The idea that Makemba is fundamentally peaceful actually really kind of aligns with the idea that he has built a trade empire. I mean, trade empires are not generally benefited by military conflict. So having a generation that has not been involved in war, like, that may be a noteworthy occurrence. And Makemba is basically here saying, we haven't had wars for the entire duration of my son's life. I want to keep it that way. But if you want to come into my territory and try and conquer me, I will stop you. And he did a damn good job of it, comparatively. I mean, he was very, very successful, even though ultimately Yao territory did fall to Germany. So the other thing that's kind of interesting here, as the footnote says, literal translation from German, the lost Swahili term. Makemba's first language would have been Swahili, which is a very, very common language in Africa. According to the Norton Anthology, the only copy of this letter that exists is a German translation in the German colonial archives. Now that's interesting. That's important because where we get documents from colonized peoples matters. I actually think this is, though, a remarkably even-handed version. I mean, obviously, if we don't have the original Swahili, I'm reading this in English translation from the German, so I don't know what Makemba originally said. I don't know if there are misrepresentations or distortions here, but this strikes me as a very honest and very sympathetic portrait of what Makemba's voice might have sounded like and what his position would be. Now that's important because in a lot of other colonial contexts, like you look back at Spanish documents from Mesoamerica, from the various civilizations that the Spanish conquered and destroyed, those documents are often, the Spanish versions of those documents are often presented in extremely unflattering lights. Like they'll translate things in such a way that it sounds like the Aztecs or whoever it is are like, we worship demons and they're evil, ha ha ha. But that's almost certainly not what the original documents would have said. That's almost certainly not what Mesoamerican peoples would have thought about themselves and their own culture. But because the Spanish had a very, very strong Catholic impulse to convert and to prove that their faith was the true faith, it distorts what these original documents said. And because all we have now are the distortions rather than the original texts in many cases, what Mesoamerican peoples thought about themselves and how they represented themselves is very often lost. We have that same kind of issue here. Makemba's original language, his original letter in Swahili, is lost. But I actually think this German version, or the English translation of this German version, seems to me at least to not have the same kinds of distortions you sometimes get with other translated texts from colonized people.